beloved travelers of life, dear souls who have journeyed through decades of experience, joy, sorrow, and wisdom, there comes a moment, a sacred threshold, when everything you thought you knew about money, about investing, about security, must be reconsidered. Not because you were wrong before, but because the game has changed, because time, that most precious and finite resource, is no longer on your side in the same way it once was. If you're over 60 years old, the decision you make in the next few minutes could mean the difference between spending your final decades in peace or in panic, between dignity and desperation, between legacy and regret. And what I'm about to tell you will contradict almost everything the financial industry has been telling you. But it's the truth, the uncomfortable, essential life-saving truth. Let me start by telling you what most financial advisors won't. They won't tell you because it doesn't serve their interests, because it doesn't generate fees, because it requires them to admit that their one-size-fits-all approach is fundamentally flawed. Here's the truth: if you're over 60, you cannot invest the same way a 30-year-old invests. You cannot take the same risks. You cannot recover from the same mistakes. You cannot afford to follow conventional wisdom designed for people with decades of earning years ahead of them. Time is no longer your ally. It's become something else, something more precious, something that demands a completely different strategy. And if you don't understand this, if you keep following advice meant for younger investors, you could lose everything you've spent a lifetime building, not in some distant future, but in the next market crash, the next downturn, the next inevitable correction. I want you to understand something deeply, fundamentally. At 60 plus, you're not building wealth anymore. You're protecting it. You're transitioning from accumulation to preservation, from growth to security, from offense to defense. And that transition, most people get it catastrophically wrong, because they've been conditioned by decades of investing advice that prioritized returns over safety, that celebrated risk-taking over prudence, that measured success by how much you made rather than how much you kept. But that advice was for a different phase of life, for when you had time to recover from losses, for when a bad year could be made up by 10 good years, for when your income could offset investment mistakes. You don't have that luxury anymore. At 60 plus, every major loss is potentially permanent. Every crash that wipes out 30, 40, 50% of your portfolio might not be recovered before you need that money to live on. That's the reality. The hard, uncomfortable reality that nobody wants to discuss, because it's not exciting, it's not sexy. It doesn't sell seminars or generate commissions, but it's true. And understanding it, accepting it, acting on it, could be the most important financial decision of your life. Let me tell you about a man I knew. We'll call him Robert. Brilliant man, successful career, saved diligently his entire working life. By the time he was 65, he had accumulated nearly $2 million in his retirement accounts. Not wealthy by billionaire standards, but comfortable, more than enough to live well for the rest of his life if managed properly. His financial advisor kept him invested aggressively, 80% stocks, 20% bonds. The advisor said this was appropriate because Robert was young for his age, and life expectancy is longer now, and you need growth to combat inflation. All of those things sounded reasonable. Robert trusted the advisor. After all, the advisor had credentials, experience, a nice office. He seemed to know what he was talking about. Then 2008 happened, the financial crisis. Robert's $2 million portfolio dropped to just over $1 million, 50% gone in a matter of months. The advisor told him to hold on, said the market would recover, said selling would lock in losses. All true statements for a 30-year-old, for someone with decades to wait for recovery. But Robert was 65, and he needed to start withdrawing money to live on. Social Security wasn't enough. His pension was small. He was depending on that portfolio, so he faced an impossible choice. Either withdraw from a portfolio that had been cut in half, forcing him to sell more shares to generate the same income, depleting his principal at an accelerated rate, or drastically cut his lifestyle, moving to a smaller home, giving up travel, living with constant anxiety about running out of money. He chose to cut his lifestyle, sold the house he'd lived in for 30 years, moved to a small apartment, gave up almost everything he'd dreamed of for retirement, watched his friends travel and enjoy their golden years while he counted pennies. And here's the tragedy. The market did recover. By 2013, it had fully recovered and gone higher. But Robert, he'd been forced to sell shares throughout the downturn to live on. He'd locked in losses. He'd depleted his principal. He'd missed most of the recovery because he had fewer shares to benefit from the rise. By the time he was 75, his portfolio was worth less than $800,000. Not because of bad investments, but because of bad timing, because he was invested aggressively at the worst possible phase of life to handle volatility. That story, I've seen it repeated dozens of times with different names and different details, but the same devastating outcome. Good people who did everything right during their working years, destroyed by following investment advice inappropriate for their stage of life. And I don't want that to be your story. I don't want you to spend your final years in regret, wondering why nobody told you the truth, wishing you'd understood these principles before it was too late. So let me give you the framework, the strategy, the truth that could save you from Robert's fate. At 60 plus, your primary investment goal is not growth. It's preservation with modest growth. Your portfolio needs to accomplish several things simultaneously, and growth is actually the least important. First, it needs to generate enough income to supplement your other sources, Social Security, pensions, part-time work, without forcing you to sell shares in down markets. Second, it needs to preserve principal so you don't outlive your money. The nightmare scenario for most retirees isn't dying too soon. It's living too long with too little money. Third, it needs to provide some growth to combat inflation. Because while growth is less important than preservation, no growth means your purchasing power slowly erodes over decades. Fourth, it needs to be simple enough that you or your spouse can manage it if something happens to the other. Complexity is the enemy of good outcomes in retirement. And fifth, it needs to let you sleep at night. If your portfolio keeps you awake with worry, if every market drop causes anxiety, if you're constantly checking balances and second-guessing decisions, your allocation is wrong regardless of what the numbers say. These 5 goals, they require a completely different approach than what worked during your accumulation years. They require an asset allocation that prioritizes safety and income over maximum returns. Here's what that typically looks like. And remember, these are guidelines, not rigid rules. Your specific situation might require adjustments. At age 60 to 65, roughly 50% in bonds and stable income assets, 40% in stocks for growth and inflation protection, 10% in cash for emergencies and opportunities. At age 60, 5 to 70, 60% bonds and income, 30% stocks, 10% cash. At age 75 plus 70% bonds and income, 20% stocks, 10% cash. Notice the pattern. As you age, you progressively reduce risk. You give up some growth potential in exchange for stability and income. You prioritize not losing money over making money. This is called a glide path, a systematic reduction of risk as your time horizon shortens and your vulnerability to losses increases. But here's what's critical. This isn't just about percentages. It's about understanding why this matters. Why being aggressive at 65 is fundamentally different than being aggressive at 35. At 35, if the market drops 50%, you have 30 years to recover. You're still adding money through contributions. Time is healing your wounds through compound growth. A crash is actually an opportunity because you're buying shares at discount prices with your ongoing contributions. At 65, if the market drops 50%, you might have only 15 to 20 years to recover. And you're not adding money, you're withdrawing it. You're selling shares to live on. A crash doesn't create opportunity for you. It creates permanent loss because you're forced to sell at depressed prices. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it's the silent killer of retirement portfolios. Let me explain this more carefully because it's so important. 2 investors. Both start retirement with $1 million. Both average 7% annual returns over 20 years. Both withdraw $50,000 per year to live on. Investor A experiences good returns in the early years, poor returns in the later years. Investor B experiences the exact opposite. Poor returns early, good returns later. Same average return, same withdrawal amount, but radically different outcomes. Investor A ends retirement with over $1 million still in the portfolio. Investor B runs out of money at year 17, forced to drastically reduce lifestyle or depend on family or government assistance. Why? Because when you're withdrawing money, the sequence of returns matters enormously. Early losses, when your portfolio is largest, are devastating because you're selling shares at depressed prices. You lock in those losses. You reduce your share count permanently. Later losses, when your portfolio is smaller, have less impact because fewer dollars are at risk. This is why aggressive portfolios are dangerous after 60. Not because they won't eventually recover, but because you might not have the time or the flexibility to wait for recovery without depleting your principal. The solution: reduce volatility. Accept lower potential returns in exchange for stability. Structure your portfolio so you're not forced to sell stocks during downturns. And that requires holding more bonds, more cash, more stable income producing assets. It requires being conservative in a world that celebrates aggression. It requires being wise rather than greedy. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, but bonds are paying low yields. Stocks have historically outperformed. I'll miss out on growth if I'm too conservative. These concerns are valid, but they're missing the bigger picture. At 60 plus, missing out on some growth is not your biggest risk. Running out of money is your biggest risk. Suffering a catastrophic loss right before or early in retirement is your biggest risk. Being forced to sell stocks at market bottoms to pay for living expenses is your biggest risk. And all of those risks are dramatically reduced by appropriate asset allocation, by holding enough bonds and cash that you never have to sell stocks at bad prices, by generating enough income that you're not dependent on selling shares. Let me give you a practical example. A properly constructed retirement portfolio might include 40% in high-quality corporate and government bonds, laddered with different maturities so some are always maturing, providing cash flow, 20% in dividend-paying blue-chip stocks, companies with long histories of stable dividends that provide income without selling shares, 20% in a broad stock market index fund for growth and inflation protection, 10% in REITs or real estate for income and diversification, 10% in cash and short-term treasury bills for emergencies. This portfolio will underperform an all-stock portfolio during bull markets, absolutely. No question. You'll watch your aggressive friends make more money during the good years, and that will be uncomfortable. But this portfolio will protect you during bear markets. It will generate income without forced selling. It will let you sleep at night. It will dramatically reduce the probability that you'll run out of money before you run out of life. And that is what matters at 60 plus. Not beating the market, not impressing your friends, not maximizing returns, but ensuring that you can live with dignity and peace for however many years remain. The Westdom offices, or there's something that happens when you reach 60, something profound that changes not just what you should do with money, but what money actually means to you. When you're young, money represents possibility, adventure, freedom to explore, to take risks, to build something from nothing. But at 60 and beyond, money represents something different, something deeper. It represents time, security, the ability to live your final years with dignity, to help your children and grandchildren, to leave something behind that matters. And this shift, this fundamental transformation in what money means, requires a completely different relationship with it. I want to tell you about a woman named Margaret. She came to me when she was 62, widowed. Her husband had managed all their finances and had passed away suddenly 2 years earlier. She inherited his portfolio, nearly $1.5 million, and felt completely overwhelmed. Her husband had been an aggressive investor, technology stocks, growth companies, high volatility, high potential returns. It had worked well during the bull market years. The portfolio had grown substantially. But Margaret couldn't sleep at night. Every market fluctuation terrified her. She'd check her account balance multiple times a day. She'd see drops of $50,000, $70,000 in a single day and feel physically ill. Her adult children kept telling her she was worrying too much, that the portfolio would be fine long term, that she should just ignore the volatility. They meant well, but they didn't understand. Margaret wasn't worried about long-term returns. She was worried about running out of money before she died. about becoming a burden to her children, about losing the security her husband had worked so hard to build. We sat down together, and I asked her a simple question. How much money do you actually need to live comfortably each year? She'd never really calculated it. Her husband had handled everything. But after going through her expenses carefully, her home, her car, her insurance, her lifestyle, we determined she needed about $65,000 annually beyond what Social Security provided. Then I asked her, if you could restructure this portfolio so it generated that $65,000 reliably every year, with minimal volatility, would you be willing to give up the possibility of spectacular growth? Her eyes filled with tears. Yes, she said. I don't need to be rich. I just need to stop worrying. We restructured everything, built a portfolio focused on income generation and stability, high-quality bonds, dividend aristocrats, companies that had raised dividends for 25 consecutive years or more, some real estate investment trusts, a modest allocation to index funds for growth, substantial cash reserves. The new portfolio generated about $70,000 annually in dividends and interest, more than she needed to live on, which meant she never had to sell shares to fund her lifestyle, never had to worry about whether it was a good time or bad time to sell. 6 months later, she came back to see me. She looked different, lighter, peaceful. I sleep through the night now, she told me. I stopped checking my account every day. I know the money will be there. That's all I needed. Her portfolio's total return was lower than the aggressive allocation she'd inherited. Over the next 10 years, she probably missed out on several $100,000 of growth that the old portfolio might have achieved. But you know what she didn't miss out on? Peace, sleep, joy. The ability to enjoy her grandchildren without constant financial anxiety. The freedom to travel and live without fear. A decade of happiness that financial stress would have stolen from her. That trade, that was worth far more than the money she left on the table by being conservative. This is the wisdom of less, the understanding that at a certain point in life, enough is better than more. Peace is more valuable than returns. Simplicity is more powerful than complexity. The financial industry doesn't want you to learn this lesson. They profit from complexity, from active management, from convincing you that you need to maximize every dollar of return, from keeping you in high-fee products that generate revenue for them. But the truth is simpler. At 60 plus, your goal should be sufficiency, not abundance, reliability, not optimization, peace, not performance. Let me give you some specific principles that should guide your financial decisions after 60. Principle 1, income is more important than total return. A portfolio that generates 5% annually in dividends and interest. Money you can spend without selling shares is superior to a portfolio that generates 7% through price appreciation alone. Why? Because dividends and interest arrive regardless of market conditions. Whether stocks are up or down, the checks come. You're not forced to sell shares at bad times. You maintain your principal. You sleep at night. This is why dividend-paying stocks become so important in retirement. Companies like Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Coca-Cola, they've paid increasing dividends for decades, through recessions, through market crashes, through every kind of economic condition. That reliability, that's what you need at 60 plus. Not the excitement of growth stocks that might double or might collapse, but the boring, predictable, sleep-at-night income from companies that have proven their stability over generations. Principle 2, simplicity beats sophistication. The more complex your portfolio, the more things can go wrong. The harder it is to understand and manage. The more dependent you are on advisors and experts. As you age, simplicity becomes increasingly important. What happens if you develop cognitive decline? What happens if your spouse, who might not understand the finances, has to take over? What happens if your advisor retires or passes away? A simple portfolio, a mix of index funds, dividend stocks, bonds, and cash, can be managed by anyone with basic financial literacy. A complex portfolio with option strategies, leverage positions, alternative investments, exotic securities, that requires expertise that may not always be available. Build for simplicity. Build for the possibility that you or your spouse might have to manage this portfolio with diminished capacity. Build so your children could understand and help if needed. Principle 3, flexibility is a form of wealth. At 60 plus, you need the flexibility to handle unexpected expenses without disrupting your investment strategy. Medical bills, home repairs, helping children or grandchildren in emergencies. These things happen, and if your portfolio is entirely in stocks or illiquid investments, you're forced to sell at potentially bad times to generate cash. This is why cash reserves become critical. Not as an investment. Cash is a terrible investment in terms of returns, but as a shock absorber, as flexibility, as the ability to handle life without derailing your financial plan. I recommend that after 60, you maintain at least 1 to 2 years of living expenses in cash or very short-term, stable investments. Yes, it's earning almost nothing. Yes, inflation is slowly eroding it, but it's buying you something more valuable, the freedom to never sell stocks or bonds at forced times. Think of cash reserves like insurance. You don't buy insurance hoping to use it. You buy it hoping you never need it, but knowing it's there if you do. Same with cash at 60 plus. It's not about returns. It's about security and flexibility. Principle 4, tax efficiency matters more than ever. When you're working and earning, paying taxes is just part of the equation. But in retirement, when your income is fixed, every dollar of unnecessary taxes is a dollar that can't be spent on living or passed to heirs. This means understanding which accounts to draw from first. Generally taxable accounts first, then tax-deferred accounts like traditional IRAs, then tax-free accounts like Roth IRAs last. This sequence typically minimizes lifetime taxes. It means understanding required minimum distributions and planning for them. At age 73 currently, the government forces you to start withdrawing from tax-deferred accounts whether you need the money or not. These withdrawals are taxable. If not planned for, they can push you into higher tax brackets and increase taxes on Social Security benefits. It means considering Roth conversions in early retirement before RMDs begin. Converting traditional IRA money to Roth IRA money in low-income years can reduce future tax burdens and provide tax-free income later. Tax strategy in retirement is complex and personal, but the principle is simple. Every dollar saved in taxes is a dollar available for living or legacy. Work with a tax professional who understands retirement taxation. It's one of the highest return activities you can undertake. Principle 5. Know the difference between needs and wants. This sounds simple, but it's profound. At 60 plus, you need to clearly separate essential expenses from discretionary ones. Essential expenses: housing, food, healthcare, insurance, basic transportation, utilities. These must be covered by reliable, guaranteed income sources. Social Security, pensions, annuity income, dividend and interest income. Discretionary expenses: travel, dining out, gifts, entertainment, hobbies. These can be covered by portfolio withdrawals and can be adjusted if markets decline or circumstances change. When you structure your finances this way, when you know that your essential needs are covered by reliable sources, you gain tremendous peace of mind. Market volatility doesn't threaten your survival. Bad years might mean less travel, but not less security. This is the foundation of a sound retirement plan. Cover essentials with guaranteed income. Fund discretionary spending with portfolio withdrawals. Adjust discretionary spending based on portfolio performance. Never touch essential needs. Now let me talk about something uncomfortable. Something most people don't want to think about but must. Long-term care. The statistics are sobering. About 70% of people over 65 will need some form of long-term care before they die. The average cost of a nursing home is over $100,000 per year. The average stay is about 3 years. Do the math. That's potentially $300,000 or more. Enough to devastate even a well-funded retirement portfolio. Enough to leave a surviving spouse in poverty. Enough to eliminate any inheritance for children. Yet most people have no plan for this. They hope it won't happen to them. They assume Medicare will cover it. It doesn't, except for brief periods after hospitalization. They assume their children will care for them, placing an enormous burden on the next generation. At 60 plus, you need a long-term care strategy. This might mean long-term care insurance, purchased ideally in your 50s or early 60s before health issues arise. It might mean self-insuring if you have substantial assets, setting aside several $100,000 specifically for this purpose. It might mean hybrid policies that combine life insurance with long-term care benefits. What it cannot mean is ignoring the issue and hoping for the best. The failure to plan for long-term care is one of the most common ways retirement plans get destroyed. One spouse needs care. The costs drain the portfolio. The healthy spouse is left with nothing. A lifetime of saving, gone in a few years. Address this now. Have the difficult conversations with family. Understand your options. Make decisions while you're healthy and thinking clearly. Don't leave it until crisis forces expensive, suboptimal choices. Let me tell you about another principle that becomes critical after 60. The principle of legacy thinking. When you're young, you're focused on building your own wealth, your own security, your own dreams. That's appropriate. That's necessary. But at 60 plus, you begin to think differently. You start wondering what you'll leave behind, what will remain after you're gone, how you'll be remembered, what you can give to the people and causes you care about. This shift from accumulation to legacy changes how you think about money. It's no longer just about you. It's about the impact you can have, the values you can pass on, the difference you can make. And this requires planning, tax planning, conversations with family about values and expectations, decisions about charitable giving, clarity about what matters most. I've seen too many families torn apart by poor estate planning, by unclear intentions, by assumptions never communicated, by wills that created conflict rather than closure, by wealth that destroyed relationships instead of strengthening them. Don't let this be your legacy. At 60 plus, estate planning is not morbid. It's loving. It's the final gift you give your family: clarity, fairness, the absence of conflict, the communication of values. Meet with an estate attorney. Create or update your will. Establish trusts if appropriate. Name beneficiaries clearly on all accounts. Have powers of attorney for health care and finances. Write a letter of instruction explaining your wishes and values. And most importantly, talk to your family. Don't let money conversations wait until you're gone. Explain your decisions. Share your values. Let them understand why you're structuring things as you are. These conversations are uncomfortable. Nobody wants to talk about their own mortality, but they're also acts of love, acts of responsibility, acts that demonstrate you care about your family's well-being even after you're no longer here to protect them. Th phenol cheshepti aris. Now we come to the deepest truth, the truth that sits at the heart of everything we've discussed, the truth that changes not just how you manage money, but how you live the years that remain. At 60 plus, you're writing the final chapters of your story. Not the whole book, but the ending, the part that people will remember, the part that defines what your life meant, the part that determines whether you finish with peace or regret. And money, properly understood, is not the story itself. It's the pen you use to write it, the tool that enables you to craft an ending worthy of the life you've lived. But most people get this backwards. They spend their final decades serving money instead of money serving them. They sacrifice peace for returns. They trade sleep for speculation. They miss the grandchildren's graduations because they're worried about market volatility. This is the great tragedy of poor financial planning after 60. Not the money lost, but the life unlived, the moments missed, the peace surrendered, the final chapters written in anxiety instead of gratitude. Let me tell you about a man named Thomas. I met him when he was 78, still sharp, still active, but deeply unhappy. He had accumulated substantial wealth, over $4 million through a successful business career and disciplined investing. More than enough for any reasonable lifestyle, more than he could possibly spend. Yet he was miserable. Every day was consumed with financial management, watching markets, reading reports, adjusting positions, worrying about whether he was optimized, whether he was missing opportunities, whether inflation was eroding his purchasing power. His wife begged him to slow down, to enjoy what they'd built, to travel while they still could, to spend time with grandchildren, to live. But he couldn't. He was trapped in a mindset formed during his accumulation years, the mindset that said more was always better. That optimization was essential. That wealth was measured by the size of the number, not by what the number enabled. Then his wife was diagnosed with cancer, aggressive, terminal, given perhaps a year. Everything changed in that moment. Suddenly the market movements didn't matter. The optimization didn't matter. The size of the portfolio didn't matter. What mattered was time, moments, memories, making her final year beautiful. They traveled everywhere she'd ever wanted to go. They stayed in the finest hotels. They ate at restaurants they'd always been too frugal to try. They gathered the whole family for celebrations and conversations. They lived more in that 1 year than in the previous 10. She passed away peacefully, surrounded by family, having experienced a final year of pure joy. And Thomas was left with $4 million and the crushing realization that he'd wasted decades in anxiety over money that had always been sufficient. He came to me 6 months after she died, and he said something I'll never forget. I had enough at 55. I had enough at 60. I had enough at 70. I always had enough. But I never realized it. I never gave myself permission to live. And now it's too late to share it with her. The grief in his voice or the regret, it was palpable. And it wasn't about money. It was about time. About the life he could have lived but didn't. About the moments he sacrificed to accumulate wealth he never needed. Don't make Thomas's mistake. Don't spend your 60s, 70s, 80s obsessing over portfolio optimization when you already have enough. Don't sacrifice the irreplaceable years on the altar of accumulation. At 60 plus, your most important financial question is not, how can I make more? It's how much is enough? And once you answer that question, once you know you have enough to live with security and dignity, everything else changes. You stop checking your portfolio daily. You stop losing sleep over market movements. You stop reading every financial publication trying to find an edge. You stop comparing yourself to others. And you start living, really living, with the freedom that comes from knowing you're secure, with the peace that comes from acceptance, with the joy that comes from presence rather than anxiety. This is financial wisdom at its highest level, not the ability to generate maximum returns, but the wisdom to know when enough is enough, when security matters more than growth, when peace matters more than performance. And that brings me to something critical, the withdrawal strategy, how you actually access your money during retirement, because this determines whether your portfolio lasts 30 years or runs dry in 15. The old rule was the 4% rule. Withdraw 4% of your portfolio in the first year of retirement, then adjust that amount annually for inflation. Research suggested this strategy would make portfolios last 30 years with high probability, but that research was based on historical returns. And we live in a world of lower expected returns, lower interest rates, higher valuations, different conditions. So let me give you an updated framework, a more adaptive, more intelligent approach to withdrawals. First, calculate your essential needs, the amount you must have every year to maintain basic security and dignity. This should be covered by guaranteed sources, Social Security, pensions, annuity income, reliable dividends, not by portfolio withdrawals. Essential needs should never depend on variable sources. Second, for discretionary spending, the travel, the gifts, the extras, use a variable withdrawal strategy. In good market years, when your portfolio has grown, withdraw more. In bad market years, when your portfolio has declined, withdraw less. This flexibility, this willingness to adjust spending based on portfolio performance, dramatically increases the probability your money will last. It prevents the devastating scenario of selling shares at market bottoms to fund fixed withdrawals. A practical approach: set a target withdrawal range, say 3 to 5% of your portfolio value. In years when your portfolio is above its inflation adjusted starting value, withdraw toward the high end. In years when it's below, withdraw toward the low end. Adjust your discretionary spending accordingly. This requires flexibility. It requires accepting that some years you'll travel more, some years less. Some years you'll give bigger gifts, some years smaller. But this flexibility is the price of security, the price of making sure your money outlasts you rather than the reverse. Third, understand the tax implications of different withdrawal sources. Taking money from a traditional IRA is different from selling stocks in a taxable account, is different from withdrawing from a Roth IRA. Generally, you want to exhaust taxable accounts first, allowing tax-deferred accounts to grow longer. Then draw from traditional IRAs. Then, if needed, Roth IRAs last since they're the most tax-efficient and make excellent legacy assets. But this is general guidance. Your specific situation might warrant a different approach. Work with a tax advisor who understands retirement distributions. The tax savings can be substantial. Fourth, coordinate with required minimum distributions. Once you reach 73, the government forces withdrawals from traditional IRAs whether you need them or not. These RMDs can push you into higher tax brackets, trigger taxation of Social Security benefits, increase Medicare premiums. Plan for this. Consider Roth conversions in your 60s and early 70s before RMDs begin. Consider qualified charitable distributions at 70 and a half, which satisfy RMD requirements but don't count as taxable income if sent directly to charity. The goal is to maintain control over your tax situation rather than having the government's withdrawal requirements dictate your tax burden. Now let me address something many people face: the decision of whether to downsize housing in retirement. For many retirees, home equity represents a significant portion of their net worth, sometimes 50% or more. And that equity, it's not generating income. It's not available for emergencies. It's just sitting there. Some financial advisors will tell you to sell your home, downsize to something smaller and cheaper, invest the difference, and generate income from those investments. On paper, this often makes mathematical sense. But life is not lived on paper. Your home is not just an asset. It's where you've lived, where you've raised children, where memories reside. It's familiar, comfortable, known. And at 70 or 75 or 80, moving is not a minor inconvenience. It's enormously stressful. It's disruptive to routines that provide stability. It's leaving a community and social connections that may be hard to rebuild. So here's my guidance. Don't downsize purely for financial reasons unless you genuinely need the money to maintain your lifestyle. The stress and disruption of moving may cost you more in health and happiness than you gain in financial flexibility. But do consider downsizing if your home has become too large and burdensome to maintain, if you're spending weekends doing yard work you no longer enjoy, if repairs are becoming overwhelming, if the house feels empty and lonely after children have left, then downsizing might improve your quality of life regardless of financial considerations. You want to live somewhere different, closer to family, warmer climate, better healthcare access, more walkable community. If the move serves your life goals and happens to free up capital, that's ideal. You need to generate cash for long-term care or other major expenses. If your portfolio is insufficient and home equity is your only substantial asset, then accessing it through downsizing or a reverse mortgage might be necessary. But don't move just because some advisor spreadsheet says it's optimal. At 60 plus, quality of life trumps financial optimization. And the emotional cost of leaving a beloved home, that's real and substantial and must be weighed against any financial benefit. If you need to access home equity but don't want to move, consider a reverse mortgage carefully. These are controversial. They have costs and complications. But for the right situation, someone who wants to stay in their home, has substantial equity, needs supplemental income, they can work. Just understand them fully. Work with reputable lenders. Have an advisor or attorney review the terms. Make sure your heirs understand the implications. Don't let high-pressure salespeople rush you into decisions. Now we arrive at perhaps the most important topic, the one that determines whether your final years are lived with dignity or desperation. Healthcare and medical expenses. Healthcare costs are the single biggest wild card in retirement planning. You can control most expenses. You can adjust discretionary spending. You can downsize housing, but you cannot choose whether you'll face major medical issues or what they'll cost. And the costs, they're staggering. The average couple retiring at 65 will spend over $300,000 on healthcare expenses throughout retirement. That's after Medicare. That's for premiums, deductibles, copays, drugs, and services Medicare doesn't cover. And that's average. Chronic conditions can cost far more. Long-term care, as we discussed, can run hundreds of thousands of dollars. A few years of serious health problems can devastate even a well-funded retirement plan. So you must plan for this. Must assume health care will be expensive. Must structure your finances to handle it without destroying your security. This means understanding Medicare thoroughly, when to enroll, which parts you need, whether a Medigap policy or Medicare Advantage makes sense for your situation, what's covered and what's not, the enrollment periods and penalties for late enrollment. It means maintaining health savings account funds if you have them. HSA money is triple tax advantaged. Tax deductible going in, grows tax-free, withdraws tax-free for qualified medical expenses. It's one of the best retirement savings vehicles available if used properly. It means budgeting realistically for health care, not hoping costs will be low. but planning for them to be high, building healthcare inflation into your projections, ensuring your portfolio can handle sustained high medical expenses without depleting prematurely. And it means, uncomfortable as it is, having end-of-life planning conversations, advance directives, living wills, healthcare proxies, DNR orders if appropriate, palliative care and hospice preferences. These conversations, they're gifts to your family. They prevent agonizing decisions made in crisis. They ensure your wishes are honored. They provide clarity when everything else is chaos. Don't avoid these conversations because they're uncomfortable. Have them because you love your family, because you want to make their burden lighter when the time comes, because clarity is kindness. Let me speak now to something that many people at 60 plus face: the desire to help adult children or grandchildren financially, to pay for education, to help with home purchases, to provide support during difficult times. This impulse, it's beautiful, it's loving, it's natural, but it must be balanced with your own security. Because here's the hard truth: you cannot help others if you've destroyed your own financial stability. You become a burden rather than a help. So the rule is simple: help others only from overflow, never from principle. Only after you're certain your own security is assured for life. Only when you know that the help you give won't jeopardize your own future. This means running the numbers, projecting your needs over a full life expectancy, or beyond, because you might live longer than average. Ensuring that even after giving, you'll have enough for 30 or 40 years. Building in buffers for unexpected expenses. If the numbers work, if you truly have surplus, then helping is wonderful. Pay for education, help with down payments, support during hardships. These are meaningful uses of wealth that strengthen family bonds and create opportunities. But if the numbers are tight, if helping might jeopardize your security, then you must say no, must explain honestly why you can't help, must prioritize your own security, because becoming financially dependent on your children in your 80s, that's a burden far greater than not receiving help in their 30s. This is love, real love, the love that refuses to create future problems to solve present ones, the love that maintains boundaries even when it's difficult, the love that teaches financial responsibility by modeling it. And finally, let me speak to the spiritual dimension of money at 60 plus. Because money, ultimately, is not about money. It's about what money represents, what it enables, what it means. At 60 plus, you begin to understand that wealth is not measured by the size of your portfolio. It's measured by the richness of your relationships, the depth of your experiences, the peace in your heart, the knowledge that you lived well and loved well and contributed something meaningful. Money is simply the tool that enables these things. That provides security so you're not consumed by anxiety. That creates options so you can live according to your values. That allows generosity so you can impact others positively. When you understand this, when you truly internalize it, your relationship with money transforms completely. You stop serving it and start using it. You stop obsessing over optimization and start focusing on sufficiency. You stop comparing yourself to others and start living according to your own definition of enough. This is financial enlightenment, not the accumulation of maximum wealth, but the wisdom to know what enough looks like and the courage to live accordingly. And in that wisdom, in that courage, you find something more valuable than any investment return. You find peace. You find joy. You find the freedom to live your final chapters with presence and gratitude instead of anxiety and regret. That is the ultimate financial goal at 60 plus. Not a number in an account, but a state of being, a way of living, a relationship with money that serves your highest values and enables your best life.